Hello and good morning. Welcome to Rhythms of Grace. I just realized it's not morning, it's lunchtime. So good afternoon and welcome to Rhythms of Grace. My name is Elizabeth Sandifer and I'm with you on Fridays as your contributor on Fridays for Rhythms of Grace. So I'm happy to be with you this afternoon and sharing with you today. I'm going to be sharing today about a devotion. I actually read this a few weeks ago, and it's a topic that's kind of interesting. The devotion is titled Darkness, and I figured today might be a good day to share about that because here in Florida, it's actually kind of like a dark and a little bit of a dreary day here in Florida, one of those cloudy, sort of overcast days. I think it's going to rain and a cold front's coming, so that's kind of nice, but these are sort of my favorite days. I like these cloudy and overcast days. I don't know about you, but these are my favorite kind of days. So I'm going to talk about that today. This devotion I'm going to share about is, I've shared from this book before. This is called Listening to Your Life by Frederick Buechner. This is what the book looks like. So I'm going to share from here today. I'm going to go ahead and just start off. I'm going to read just the first sentence. Hi, Alla. Hey, happy lunchtime. Hi, John Paul. I see you're in there too. Hey, guys. So I'm going to start off with this, just reading to you the first line from this devotion. And then I'm going to read a little bit from the Bible and then come back to it and then share some thoughts about this. And again, this topic is on darkness. So it's kind of interesting. So the first line of this devotion, the first line says, "The Old Testament begins with darkness, and the last line of the Gospels ends with it." So let me just read the first line to you. So we're going to go to Genesis 1, and I'm just going to read to you where they mention darkness. And a lot of people know this, if you, of course, have read this first part of the Bible. It's just one of my even just favorite things in the Bible is just what it says in the very beginning. And this is what it says. "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Okay, so darkness was over the surface of the deep. So there it is, opening of the Bible, and darkness was over the surface of the earth. So there it talks about darkness, okay? And so then I'm going to go back to my devotion here because we're going to talk about how it ends the Gospels talking about darkness too. So in this devotion of mine, he goes on to say, darkness was upon the face of the deep, as it says in Genesis. Darkness was where it all started. Before darkness, there had never been anything other than darkness, void and without form. At the end of John, okay, the disciples go out fishing on the Sea of Tiberias. It is night. They have no luck. Their nets are empty, and they spot someone standing on the beach. At first, they don't see who it is in the darkness. It is Jesus. All right, so let me just read this to you. So I'm going to turn to John, the book of John, which is the last of the Gospels, and I'm going to turn to chapter 21, and I'm just going to read to you this little bit of a story in case anyone's not familiar with this, and then I want to share some thoughts about it. So, all right, so this is, Jesus has been crucified. He has not yet appeared to Peter. Peter's out fishing on the water. So this is kind of where it picks up. So it says here, all right, afterward Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. So there's several disciples, they name a bunch of names, and they're going to go out fishing, okay? I'm going to go out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, well, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, don't you love that? The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals, there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" For they knew that it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he'd been raised from the dead. So, and then it goes on. I encourage you to read the rest of the chapter. I'm not going to for time, but one thing I do want to read is right after this. It does say in verse 15, when they'd finished eating breakfast, Jesus said to Simon, "Simon, do you truly love me?" And this is when he asked him 3 times in a row, "Simon, do you love me?" And then each time when Simon said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," he said, "Take care of my sheep," or "Feed my sheep." So that happens right after this, because I'm going to kind of mention that in a minute. So I just wanted to read that to you there. So, okay. So now I'm going to go back to my devotion, because I just want to make sure everybody knew that story so that you kind of understood. Make sure we're on the same page when I finish reading this. So, all right, so let me finish up this devotion, and we're going to talk about that. All right, so it says here, the darkness of Genesis is broken by God in the great mystery, speaking the word of creation, let there be light. That's all that it took. And the darkness of John is broken by the flicker of a charcoal fire in the sand. Jesus made it. He took some fish on it for his old friend's breakfast. On the horizon, there are the first pale traces of the sun getting ready to rise. This is the same sun that God himself set on fire in the heavens. This is the same sun. All the genius and glory of God are somehow represented by these 2 scenes in the Bible. The original creation of light itself is almost too extraordinary to take in. Only a saint or a visionary can begin to understand God setting the very sun on fire in the heavens to create light. And the little cookette on the beach is almost too ordinary to take seriously. So, and then I'm going to save the very last verse for at the very end here. But did you hear what he said there? Did you see what Buechner said there? God, with the power to light the sun on fire in the heavens. Because, of course, that's how he created light. The sun is a ball of fire up in the heavens. And that's how he created light. He set the very sun on fire in the heavens. It's the same God who sought out Peter himself on the beach out when he was fishing in that boat this morning and drew him to himself with his very breath, which created a spark over the charcoal, which created a fire, which he cooked breakfast, which he fed to Peter, which gave life. And this is what I really wanted to talk about with you this morning, because Peter was in the boat. And what had Peter just done? Before the crucifixion, Peter had just denied Jesus 3 times. He just denied Jesus, and Jesus had predicted that would happen, and Peter had said, no, I'm not, that's not me, I'm not the one who's going to do that. And of course he did that. And I can only imagine that he was full of shame, and those words saying Peter was probably full of shame seem really small. I can really only imagine what Peter must have been feeling. I don't know if you've ever had this happen. I hope not, because it's a heartbreaking situation. But have you ever regretted a last conversation with someone? It's a horrible, heartbreaking place to have been if you've ever been in a place like that where you didn't get to say what you wanted to, or where you wished you hadn't said what you did. But what Peter had done was even worse than that, because Peter had even denied even ever knowing him. So saying Peter was full of shame out on that boat is probably small words, I would think. I would think that he probably was full of regret and remorse and guilt, and probably hating himself, I would imagine, and probably replaying it over and over and over in his head. You know how we do that with these situations? And again, I can only imagine a fraction, I think, of what Peter probably was feeling out on that boat. And I read something else that Buechner has said later on in this book, and this is, again, about how Peter had denied Jesus. And I just want to read this to you, because this was like really I just want to share this with you, because this has to do with this too. So let me read this to you, because this is about this. So Buechner in this part is talking about a sermon he heard once about this topic. And the preacher was talking about St. Peter. And so he says, he's talking about St. Peter in any case, how Peter was sitting outside in the high priest's courtyard while Jesus was inside being interrogated. A maidservant came up and asked him if it wasn't true that he was a follower of this man who was at the root of all the trouble. Then Peter said, "I do not know the man." It was Peter's denial, of course. This preacher said, "I do not even know who he is." It was the denial that Jesus himself had predicted. And the rooster raised its beak into the air and crowed, just as Jesus had foretold. But it was something else too. It was denial, but it was also the truth. Peter really did not know who Jesus was. He did not really know, and neither of us do any of us really know who Jesus is either. Beyond all we can find to say about him and all we can find to believe about him, he remains always just a little bit beyond our grasp, except maybe once in a while, the hem of his garment. And so I read that, and I was just like, that's amazing. See, I think for Peter, in the darkness, over the coals, that small fire that Jesus had lit by the light of the world himself, maybe that was just the beginning of where Peter was going to get to know this Jesus. And when Jesus fanned the flames with his breath, he breathed life into that fire. And he prepared a meal, and he invited Peter to come and eat with him. And even back then, meal sharing was a very symbolic thing to do. And when you asked someone to share a meal with you, it was inviting relationship. It was inviting friendship. And that's what Jesus was doing. Peter didn't really know him. I think those words that Buechner shared that he heard from that preacher, that was striking to me, because I don't believe that Peter really did know Jesus. Maybe the denial maybe that's not really the big picture, that Peter's the denier. Maybe he was telling a half-truth, or maybe even a whole truth. How would he know him? The resurrection hadn't happened yet. He wasn't aware of the resurrection yet. And maybe that's what we're all waiting for, to really know Jesus, or to maybe know more of Jesus, to know him more. Maybe we're all just waiting to touch the hem of his garment, just maybe even one more time. We too are waiting for our own resurrections, or waiting to be resurrected again, in all those shadow places in our own hearts, those places that we need lit on fire in our own hearts and souls, in our own darkness, because we all have those places. And thankfully, the cross didn't have the final say, because the light of the world is here, and he's still here. And Jesus always breathes life. When he comes, life happens, and shame lifts. That's what happened with Peter. And Jesus asked Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" That's a very vulnerable question. And sometimes I think we focus on the answer all the time. That's how I always heard it, that Peter answered, or Jesus, not that Peter answered, but that Jesus responded with, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. And it was always this conversation about what we're supposed to go do now. But when you stop and you think that the God of the universe showed this incredible vulnerability to even ask, do you love me? Have you ever asked someone that question? It's a very hard question to ask somebody. Do you love me? And the God of the universe is sitting here asking Peter that question. It's like the great reversal, because I can only imagine that that's how Peter was feeling. Peter wanted to ask that question. How could he not be thinking that? After replaying that in his head, what he had done, thinking, does he love me? With what I've done, how could he? I denied him. And Jesus not only loved him, Jesus was loved to him with his actions, because he pursued him. He came for Peter in the darkness that morning, and he lit a fire, and he fed him and entered a relationship into him through this very simple meal. In Peter's own darkness, he came, and he resurrected Peter's heart. And everything else follows, the feeding of the sheep and the taking care of the sheep, because we love because he first loved us. It all follows. As we're loved, so we can begin to love. So at the end of the devotion, it kind of follows up. It finishes up by him saying, let me just read you the end here. I'm almost done. At the end here, he says, Buechner goes on to say, it's most likely not our interest in the stars or even in theology that draws us to these stories in the Bible so much as the empty feeling in our stomach. You don't have to really understand anything very complicated. All you're asked to do is take a step or two forward through the darkness and start digging in. And I just love how that ends, because maybe it's just the hunger that we all have for more than just breakfast. Maybe it's the hunger that we all have, and what we're all really hungering for maybe is just to get those shadow places in our hearts, those places of darkness that we feel. We just desperately want the light to come. We want to get out of those places of the dark. And our really good news is that even the darkness is light to him. So it doesn't scare him away. Those are the places he comes to enter into. And so I just wanted to share that with you this morning. And I hope that that encourages you a little bit. And when the sun eventually comes out here in Homosassa, Florida, after this cloudy day, we can look up at that sun and see that the God of the universe set that sun on fire to give us light, even in the very beginning of the Bible. And that's beautiful. And that same God comes and he breathes that little spark of life into those dark places in us, just like he did with Peter and that great reversal. And he does that with us. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope that you all have a very blessed rest of your afternoon. If you go to Nature Coast Church, I'll see you on Sunday. And you can watch it live on Facebook at 10 a.m. if you can't make it there, if you don't go there. So have a wonderful day, and I'll see you.